Hi, and welcome to the Relationship Restaurant podcast. We are Poppy and Jeff Spencer. Here on the Relationship Restaurant, we talk about heart-healthy communication. And involved with that comes often, with many of the people in our relationships as well, comes conflict and dispute and communication snags that we bump up against, right? And so in our mediation, we're becoming Florida Supreme Court family law mediators, and we have the last stages of that coming up. And Jeff especially is working on some course material.
Yeah, I get to take some extra courses because unlike Poppy, I don't have a master's degree.
Well,
so I get to go back to school. But actually, when we first entered into this, Poppy, I was kind of like, oh, great, I have to do this extra stuff that you don't have to do. But
it's awesome.
We've both discovered there's some great stuff we've discovered here that we want to share.
Right. And even in my psychology, my Master of Science, I didn't come across this necessarily. So I think it's really valuable information. We'd like to share it with you. So people, when they're in conflict or they're in a dispute, they have underlying 4 types of goals. And they broke it down, the material that the course is providing, the authors broke it down into an acronym.
Always the best thing to do, an acronym.
Right. It's easy, right? And it's called TRIP, like you take a trip or a vacation. But TRIP stands for the goals that people have. So T is for topic. Number 2 is relational. Number 3 is identity, or what they call face work. That's in parentheses, like saving face. And number 4 is process. So it's topic, relational, identity, and process. And these are the 4 major goals that people have, and they overlap and shift during any kind of conflict or fighting or even a minuscule little spat that you have. So let's break it down. I'm going to have Jeff do that. He'll start with topic goals, which is all about what we want.
Yeah, and whenever we have a debate, an argument about anything, Poppy, it always comes down to there's something we want, something we're looking for. And in many cases, they might be, we want separate things. We're in a debate. It can be easily something like people say, we want to, if I'm trying to sell my house to someone and I want a price of $200,000 and they think they want to pay $150,000, see, we have a difference of what we want. Okay?
Right.
There's a big difference in that. Or we could be wanting the same thing.
Right.
And we're struggling, fighting over, trying to get control of that same thing. So the topic is sort of like the content of whatever it is that we see as the reason for the disagreement or the dispute.
Okay, so it even could be like, okay, let's say on Mother's Day, we both want to be with the mothers, but they live in different cities or they live in different counties. And so we both want the same thing.
Right.
How are we going to resolve that topic or that content if we both want the same thing?
Well, like any of these kind of things, it's going to come down to good communication, and it's understanding what the other person wants, and realizing that you can typically, with good negotiation skills, can find a meeting spot somewhere along the ways. And as we're going to get into, we're going to see that often the topic itself isn't the real challenge here. The next couple of ones we're going to get into, the R and the I often become much more the drivers, what's behind this. And as we'll get into, you'll see that many cases the topic is just it's kind of just, it's like, imagine a can of paint and you're popping it open. You're looking at that can and you pop it open though, and there's a whole lot of different colors that need to be swirled together here to make this come together.
Okay, great. Good.
I just threw a metaphor in the middle of our acronym here. Right?
I like that. I like paint. We've all seen that, what that looks like. So what we can do, though, is we can make pros and cons, right?
Yes.
We can make pros and cons about the topic and about the content. Well, how about if this year we brainstorm together and that we visit your mother this year, and then for the next holiday, we'll go and visit the other mother, or we Skype with both mothers and we stay home. Mm-hmm. There's an endless supply of opportunities. So not to get bogged down in the content, but to be open to problem solving.
Yeah, and as we see, as we go further into this, so much of this often becomes a question of just who is really controlling this argument. What is our relationship in the argument, in the debate, in the conflict? And again, as we get into the other letters, it'll evolve, as we'll see.
Okay, so we're talking about types of goals in conflict. The acronym TRIP: topic, relational, identity, and process. We just discussed topic goals of what do we want. And so if we can lay that out for our partner or our coworker, whomever it is, and brainstorm together with pros and cons, we can usually take that off the table as something that's going to really stir the pot, so to speak. So the next one is relational goals. And it's who are we to each other? Who are we in relationship to each other? It defines how each of us wants to be treated by the other and the amount of interdependence we desire and how we define ourselves as a unit. So in other words, we're not codependent. We have a healthy relationship. Right,
but you can see this is how things start to, how in a conflict that things can be, the real root of the issues, the underlying things start to really come to the surface. It's how you want to be treated by the other. So if you feel like you're not being respected, if you're not being heard, that can absolutely get in the way now of what you're trying to be doing. And also, according to it, it'll be defining what is our relationship. How committed to me are you? Are you my friend? Are you my lover? What is our relationship? That often starts to get bogged down in here too. Is what is our dynamic according to what we think of each other?
So the solution here is to understand, and maybe even do that even in the midst of a conflict. We might be able to say, hey, let's back up a little bit. Let's redefine the parameters of our relationship. Let's make sure that, I'm your primary person. I am the most important person. I mean, I know certainly when, before Jeff and I, got married, we were engaged, and there was a time that I had a sort of a low moment. I was down a quart in my emotional oil can, and I needed that reassurance from him that I was his primary person. And we even came up with that. He goes, well, wait a minute, you're my soulmate person. And it was like, oh, okay. Now I know who I am. That was something that I just needed, that reminder. So sometimes we just need that reminder for both parties to step back and say, yes, you are the most important person in my relationship. And we still have to get through this snag that we have going on to resolve.
Right, and one of the things Poppy and I have we've been getting education about the mediation process. We've actually been doing mediations and been a part of them.
Co-mediated.
And so one of the things that we've absolutely learned in this, how this affects mediation, if you ignore the relationship concerns during mediation, you'll experience a big problem in helping the divorced people reach an agreement, because once again, you might have a topic that you're talking about. Let's say it's going to be the alimony or the parenting plans, two big areas, and of course in divorce discussions and mediation. What typically starts happening, though, the relationship issues creep into it and will block the process and forward progress on these things, okay? So it's so important to keep track of these things and make sure that they're not stopping what you're trying to actually accomplish, what the original topic of the content of the disagreement.
And it's so important that you bring that up. Both Jeff and I have been divorced before we were married, and I hold and honor my former husbands, and I call them former instead of exes because it sounds a little nicer. And I hold them as...
It's kind of like a used car, previously owned.
Yes, but they were the father of my children. So on Father's Day and Mother's Day, it's important to honor those people, as I was honored by my one of my former
And
husbands.
I do the same kind of thing. I know
Mother's Day.
Mother's Day, I was tapping my son on the shoulder electronically with some text going, so how are you observing Mother's Day here? Making sure that he was keeping track of this and doing something.
And it's really important that even in dispute, even if someone's going through a divorce, it's important to acknowledge and honor and respect those roles, especially if there's children involved, so that the partner doesn't turn into just an ex-person that you're going to, extricate from your life. That person, if they are the father or the mother of a parent, should have a primary importance, obviously, unless there's forms of abuse or neglect or some sort of horrible thing, then of course you wouldn't necessarily go out of your way to encourage that. But it's important to remember that the relationship, even in conflict.
One of the things that we have also learned in this process, Poppy, is the relational goals are really kind of at the heart of all these conflict interactions. But they're often hard to. It's difficult to specify these things, especially from outside. Everybody has their own way of looking at these events. They look at the same event and translate it and have their own meaning about it.
Absolutely. So subjective.
It's all subjective. So it's often very, very hard for people to nail this thing down as to what the real problem is. And I know you and I have seen this, and even when we've had any disagreement or conflicts, often it's after the fact we figure it out, and we'll be getting to more about that here too.
Right, and so, but even if it's during a time, you're like, if you can stop yourself and hit the pause button for just 3 seconds and go, okay, why am I feeling this knot in my stomach? What am I really upset about in this moment? And maybe it's just that you need your relational goal to be highlighted and pinged. Maybe you just need to be reminded that yes, you are important here, and then maybe the topic ceases to be that important, and whatever the fight is about loses and diminishes in value.
I've got a good little summary here too that kind of talks about the relationship goal. Every statement that we make carries some sort of a relational message.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's what people often don't realize. Just even body language and this little tones can have all kinds of relational messages to them. And again, we all interpret these messages very differently.
Right.
It might be completely. This has happened with even you and I, where I will say something, and I might just be fatigue or something on my part that causes you to interpret what I said in an entirely different way.
Right.
And not at all. And that's what we'll often have these conversations like, that is not at all what I was intending. We'll be kind of clarifying these things.
And I just want to jump on that a little bit, because I think it's important that then I bring it up to you and say, I know he didn't mean to upset me or sound disrespectful, but I want you to know that that's how I interpreted it, and that's how I received it. And so it heightens awareness on both parties, and that really is so important in any kind of communication.
Right. The other thing about these relational interests, they're a lot more urgent to people than the topic.
Yes.
These things are really, really deep rooted in you, and the topic itself is very secondary. And often our relational interests are triggered in reaction to our interpretation of the other's behavior. Again, that's what we were just kind of saying, is that according to what happens, we'll react in a different fashion. And
as we were watching, and spoiler alert if you're not on season 8 of Game of Thrones.
Uh-oh.
But when Daenerys is talking to Jon Snow, and basically she's asking this thing in the 5th episode, she's asking, he goes, well, I love you. You are my queen. But it's like, okay, well, which one? Which one is more important? Mm-hmm. Am I your queen, that everybody has to follow me as the queen, or am I that soulmate person?
Right.
And she didn't really get the answer that she wanted. right?
She was wanting to get the soulmate thing, and she didn't get that.
I love you more than anything else. I love you more than my queen. And so it's really important. Like that was Daenerys's whole purpose there is I want to be loved by you. Right? Mm-hmm. Don't you think?
Yes.
Okay. The other thing is, then what happens is a lot of times we become reactive. And so I've got this image of what our relationship is. You have your image of what our relationship is. And then we tend to react according to one another's interpretation. And so it's almost like speaking a language. Like if I were speaking French and Jeff is speaking Spanish or just English, the translations are not always like exact, right? There's always a little fuzziness and a little bit of distortion, I guess, that goes along with it. So it's really important that we go through each one and extract meaning for each word in one sentence. It's really important. And as Jeff mentioned again, the micro expressions, the body language, the intonation of our voice. It's so important how to do that. And so when Jeff was talking before, he said, are you, maybe I'm just fatigued. So it's up to me to interpret that and go, okay, is this just tiredness talking because we got up at 5 a.m, or is there something else going on? And it's up to us to do that. And you can stop those conversations in the midst of conflict and go, hey, let's just take a time out here. Do you think we should table this conversation after we have a little rest? Or
is really getting to the last letter process.
Okay. Or is this something going on? Okay, I didn't mean to jump in.
No, but it's a very valid point. That's the fourth letter that we'll be getting to, yes.
Okay, so the third one is, and the TRIP is topic, relational, identity, or face saving. And the I is identity. Who am I in this interaction? And I really, really like this one a lot because as we interact with people, we always bring ourselves with us, right? It's the identity. So
and how we see ourselves. And in fact, it's funny, the musical Les Miserables, there is a famous song in there called Who Am I?
Yes.
Okay. And it kind of asks that entire question about who am I in this world, and what is going to be my legacy, and must my name until I die be more than just an alibi, just really powerful things about who am I to the core. And so often these kind of debates will get to you. You'll say like, well, how am I actually in this entire discussion?
It's funny that you say this. I was for 8 or 9 years, I taught psychology, a variety of courses at Ringling College of Art and Design in Southwest Florida. And for a final exam, many of my students would just lament and groan because the topic was, who am I? And we went through Erik Erikson's identity and every Freud and Jung and all of the behavioral psychoanalysts and everybody and they had to, in a concise way, say who they were. And it's really funny because, and Jeff and I have talked about this before, a lot of times we don't like to self-examine. We don't want to do that introspection because it's icky feeling. We sometimes come up and bump up against things that are insecurities and fears and flaws, and we don't really want to look at those things. And we like to save face. We like to put on a Facebook face or an Instagram face. We want to keep that perfect picture, perfect image. And we like to boost ourselves up with that kind of false persona when in fact we have many things that make us prone to vulnerability and weakness and failures and all those things that define us. And we don't like to examine them. But if we can examine them with a detached eye, we will be so much better off. But anyway, let's get into identity here.
But one of the things, there's some great quotes here. One of the psychologist Brown said, in some instances, protecting against loss of face becomes so central an issue that it swamps the importance of the tangible issues at stake and generates intense conflicts that can impede progress toward agreement and increase substantially the costs of conflict resolution. This is what we see in mediation. This is exactly what we see in a mediation where they feel like they're losing face in some way, that they're being embarrassed, that I've lost track of who I am, and of all the other issues that could be possibly agreed to. An alimony amount, a parenting plan. They push all those things aside and strictly want to save face. And that can just destroy and damage almost the entire mediation agreement and process, because saving face becomes central.
Right. And so many times, I mean, we've certainly heard this through all of our mediation experience to date, that people want to come out of mediation saying, I won. Mm-hmm. And many times, both parties, a successful mediation will actually reveal that both parties come out believing that they lost. And that's actually a successful one, because there is no winner. There is that isn't even on the map, mm-hmm. The winning and losing. But we have this thing with our identity, the trip, the I in trip, the identity makes us want to either save face or damage face. And so, and people with lowered self-esteem, this is really a damaging thing too.
Right, and what happens when your self-esteem starts to get challenged, you're seen as being less than your
unintelligent.
Opponent. Right, this actually cranks up one's desire to fight.
Right.
The more you feel that, the more you want. The stakes keep getting higher and higher to you. So the more that happens, the more you just want to fight for fighting's sake to maintain face.
Right. And we've all seen that before, where you keep arguing a point, even though you know it's ridiculous, it's wrong. You keep beating this dead horse, right? I mean, we've seen this happen.
But again, back to the introspection, there was an excellent quote that we both were talking about earlier.
From Kahneman. He says, changing one's mind about human nature is hard work. And changing one's mind for the worse about oneself is even harder. So basically, it's what I was alluding to earlier, that when we start to look at all of ourselves, we have a shadow self of ourselves, right? Our ego. And our ego wants to put our best foot forward. But we also have a less than best foot that we need to examine as well, mm-hmm. right? And so it's really hard for us to do that, because the ego is saying that, no. We want to project this perfect persona. We don't want to go there. We don't want to look at the shadows and the darkness. And we all have that. We all have aggression. We all have fear. And to pretend or put out there that we don't is false.
One of the things that happens too with this Poppy is that when you have someone who's loses in an argument, that they feel like they've lost, they'll want to, because of the idea of making the self-image and making saving face, making this right, they'll do a lot of things after the fact to try to get back, to make it right, to subvert a process, or just leave a relationship, if they feel that's the way they can save face. So many times it's after the fact.
Right. And so it's so weird. So if someone feels embarrassed or humiliated just because maybe part of them was exposed, maybe some secret was breached between two parties, mm-hmm. right? And someone will feel very disrespected or vulnerable or exposed and not okay with putting out that vulnerability in front of them. I love Brene Brown. She talks about vulnerability and how important that is. And in the writing of our best-selling Amazon book, 1 Billion Seconds, we have a quote in there that we created saying, with complete vulnerability comes absolute empowerment. And it really is, it sounds counterintuitive, but it really is. If you embrace your fears, if you showcase your vulnerabilities, you will actually feel free and relieved, and you will become more empowered, not disempowered.
And you have the opportunity to love with all your heart and soul too, because if you hold back, that's the thing that makes it not work.
So the I in the TRIP acronym, one of the researchers calls it the identity trap, because our identity issues, they actually disable us from seeing productive paths of solutions.
Mm-hmm.
We can't see the solutions because our ego is pounding in our head like, don't let them see this flaw. Don't let them see this insecurity. Don't let them see your fear. Protect it at all costs. And this comes from our evolutionary brain, by the way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Instead, human beings were put on this earth to survive and reproduce. And so the caveman in the early days used to protect against the saber-toothed tiger, right? And so in our emotional survival, we still have that encoded in our brain, that evolutionary part of us that wants us to protect our ego at all costs.
And there's three different things that kind of show this too, by the way, Poppy. One of the ways you can see that people are trying to save face is that they'll claim some sort of unjust intimidation, that they've been, forced into this in some way, shape, or form. Or, of course, the other thing we'll see is they'll refuse to step back from a position, no matter how ridiculous it is, no matter how illogical it might appear, or even damaging to them. They'll stick to their guns because they're just trying to save face. Okay? And the other thing they'll do is they'll sort of whitewash it. They'll suppress these whole conflict issues and say it really isn't there. They'll just say it's,
So they're in denial?
To a degree, or just saying that it really isn't there. They'll just kind of say that's not what you think it is. It's something different. And that's again way just that they can look better, because they'll say, well, there really isn't an issue here. That's something you're just imagining.
So as if you're in a conflict, or you're perhaps a party in mediation, one of the things you can do is help that other person. There are four things you can do. Is help that person increase their sense of self-worth, right? We all have self-worth. Is there a way that you can do that? We say in mediation, we say comments all the time to reassure people during this process. You're doing great so far.
Right.
We're so glad that
everybody gets upset about some of these things. We can get past this. We can keep going here. It's not that.
Yeah, and you praise them for, this last point that we both agree to. I really applaud you. That's awesome. And then the other thing that is so important is that you want people to be able to problem solve that themselves, right? You want to be able to give them options, but not give them commands or directives.
Yeah, exactly. Just stop with the absolutes that can once again force them into a corner of some sort.
So you use words like, have you considered this?
Yeah.
What other options can you come up with that could move this process
Absolutely.
forward? And so people, if they have the sense of empowerment back in their own hands, they're much more able to move forward and be successful. The other thing that's really important is people being able to listen carefully to others and take their concerns to heart,
Which this is, again, in the world of the divorce mediation, really hard for people to do.
Yeah.
This idea of saving face is so powerful.
Yes.
That it often can push all this. This is just being decent, basically, is what we're the point here is, listen, don't be so self-consumed that you can't listen to what the other person's saying, and it'll make it'll reduce the conflict so much more if you just listen and take their concerns into account.
And I like the last point that they suggest here, the authors of this. It's Folger, Poole, Stutman, from a 2008 research that they did. They said, ask questions so that the other person can examine his or her goals. And so there again, you zoom out a little bit and give them the opportunity to continue to save face if that's what they need to do. And to say, okay, so what's the most important thing to you now? What's your primary concern in this moment? Mm-hmm. Okay.
So the last letter, P.
P for process goals. What communication process will be used? what works best? Many times people disagree about how to formally or informally work through a conflict. And in addition to changing the levels of influence, different processes encourage or discourage creative solutions. Something quick, well-defined, help you move forward, but it may shut down creativity and innovative solutions. Longer processes can build in time and give you time for reflection, evaluation, and improve the chances for creativity. So, and we also are Myers-Briggs certified practitioners, and we see this a lot. I think it's so important. We've actually written a paper on this, how important knowing someone's Myers-Briggs in any kind of conflict is so important. So if somebody has a preference for making decisions at their leisure and not wanting to be time-bound, this is really important that both parties understand and appreciate this and respect
the other
this.
P versus process.
Yes, the perceivers. So somebody that has that's not quick to make decisions, and especially many married couples that we've worked with, one is a very fast, decision maker, let's go. The other one really needs to think it over and take their time. And what happens in those many times in those situations is that the quick decision maker starts to belittle and demean that person that really needs more time for reflection.
Earlier in this podcast, Papa, you said something about, what if we're having an argument? It's late at night. Should we table this so we have fresher minds and clarity and a chance to sleep on it and talk about it in the morning? Now, that can be a great, huge debate. Someone will say, no, I want this resolved. I don't want to go to bed angry.
Oh, and many times, old wives' tales and mothers and
never
grandmothers.
Never go to bed angry.
Never go to bed angry.
Right. And nobody wants to go to bed angry, but, if you're so tired and so, once again, you've dug in your heels and you're stuck in your position, you can't open up because of just fatigue and the desire to just get some rest. It might behoove you to say, well, you know what, let's agree just to disagree at this time. Let's, get a good night's rest, talk about it in the morning, and we'll resolve it when we have fresher minds.
And we have done this ourselves. And, but that is to say the caveat here is to cuddle if that's what you do and say, I love you, and we will work this out.
Right.
We are a team. We're going to work this out.
Where you get in trouble is when you shove it under the rug and you don't resolve it. That's when the emotional clock kicks into gear here and you work your way down to being upset about it. So.
Yeah, don't be a couch sleeper, right? Don't go to the couch. Stay in the bed and zoom out again and love this person for who they are.
We're going to move on now. We've talked about the 4 letters. We're going to talk about
it's topic, relational, identity, and process.
Right.
That's the TRIP acronym.
Those are the 4 things.
Those are the 4 goals that people have when they enter into any kind of disagreement or conflict.
One of the things that they also discuss in this class that I've been studying, that these different goals will often have an overlapping nature to them. One won't drive it. They'll interact and overlap with each other in a big way. And not all types of goals emerge in these disputes. You might just say disputes might emerge without any kind of a process question.
Right. Could be just relational.
It could be just relational, or do they stick just to the actual topic? And we also know that interests and goals can overlap with one another and differ in which is more important. Right. So, and
we talk about, we had Gary Chapman on our show, the 5 love languages author, right? If you don't know your partner's primary love language, and you bring your partner gifts or let them play golf with the guys or whatever, when actually your partner's quality or the primary goal is not gift giving and it's quality time with you, you disengage their primary love preference.
Absolutely. It's also important to understand, and we've talked about this, that the identity and relational issues are usually the actual drivers of a dispute, okay? They underline the topic and process issues.
Right.
So while you might say, it's very obvious to see here's the topic, here's the content of what we're arguing about, what the conflict is, and we have a clear process to go about it. what's causing the real actual conflict, though, is that relationship and identity issues. That's where your stomach is churning. That's the heart of this entire process. So
what that person needs there is not necessarily a resolution about the content. They need something deeper. They need reassurance that they're the primary soulmate person, that they're the most important person in the world, that they are loved for all of their beauty that they bring in the world, and they're valued.
And this kind of goes back to what we've seen in mediations. In a serious dispute, topic-only solutions are rarely satisfying to the parties in this conflict. For example, let's say you get a large lump sum settlement that you were wanting to get, but you still don't feel satisfied because the one thing you really wanted was them to say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I put you through all this. I'm sorry that we've had this.
I'm sorry I betrayed you.
Yeah, you wanted a sincere apology is the thing that you really, really wanted, that relationship, that core that you were trying to get to. So it's, that's a big important piece of how these things overlap.
And it's sometimes that people are kind of specialists in one of these kinds of goals. So somebody in a conflict might have an ongoing struggle, and they highlight one type of the goal, the T, the I,
and they're just kind of stuck on that.
And then they're limited because they can't go through all four of those goals, and they become stagnant.
Right,
in that process.
And they won't move forward at all because all they can think about is that one thing. They don't, they might look at it very differently. And the last point they make is that goals can emerge in very different forms as well. Something you thought was one is actually an entirely different thing. And this kind of gets to another interesting point. You and I were talking about this the other day, is that the goals might change also during the interaction. Yeah. You might be going into this thing thinking one thing, but there could be a large change that takes place. There's three different kinds of interactions with the goals. You go into it with kind of a prospective goal. This is what you think you're going to be wanting to get. This is what you're initially.
Here's what we're after.
Here's what I'm after.
Okay, and then so the prospective goals leads, and then we can have transactive goal.
Right. This is what you and I were talking about the other day, is that during a conflict, you realize that you stumble into something that you didn't even know that was your goal. It kind of just presents itself during the conflict.
Right.
And you realize, I guess this is what I thought I wanted this, but maybe I really want this.
So oftentimes we do that, and Jeff and I have talked about this many times, where we will have a little anxiousness or confusion about something, and we'll say, I'm not really sure what's bugging me. That's what that really is with transactive goals. If you don't have the awareness that something's bothering you, you just can't put your finger on it. That's usually what happens there, is that you start talking about one topic, and it's not really about, did you take out the trash? It's about something entirely different.
And then finally, there's the retrospective goal, where it's kind of after you've had the conflict and it's over, you spend so much time and energy kind of justifying the decisions that you've made. And, and thinking about, well, that's why I did it. And you just do a lot of spinning the wheels after the fact of, kind of hashing it over in your own mind.
But, and I actually like retrospection, because I think it's great to go back but to view it with a really objective eye, not a subjective one.
That's the important part.
Is that you're not justifying your actions, but you're saying, hey, I think this is really where I was coming from. And here's why. I was tired. My energies were depleted. I was, this. And I think that's what happened. And I'm sorry if I turned crabby toward you, or if I didn't appreciate you the way I should have. That's the kind of heart-healthy communication that we always talk about.
Okay. When we're talking about goals, so many people get into trouble because they just really haven't clarified the goals as they're presenting them. And goals that are unclear or hard to understand, they create more conflict, okay? So solutions can go completely unrecognized if you don't know what you really want.
Right.
Okay.
And this is what I was starting to get to just a second ago, if you don't know what you want, if something is bugging you and you feel anger, upset, you're confused, you're anxious, you've got your stomach churning, share that with your partner. You can not have to save face. You don't have to go to number 3 in the TRIP acronym and have that identity. Don't lead with that. Instead, say, I'm not sure what is bugging me. I just have this unpleasant feeling, this undesirable emotion or thought that I have, and I need some help in trying to pull it apart.
Okay. A couple more points about clarifying the goals. Only clear goals can be shared. If you don't have a clear goal, it's hard to share anything. Clear goals can also be altered a whole lot more easily than a vague goal. If you clearly know what you want, you can make alterations here and adjust accordingly versus the vague ones. You're
So it's important to ask your partner or your coworker, whoever else you're having what do we want here? What is the best outcome that we want here? And to make sure that you both understand what each other wants. And if it's not the same thing, make sure that you both acknowledge what the other one wants.
Right. And finally, clear goals can be reached a whole lot more easily than an unclear goal. So, go into any kind of conflict if you're understanding that goal very clearly. And kind of a last point that we want to touch on that gets people in trouble, and this is what got you and I in trouble all those years ago back in college, Pops, when we were guessing what the other person was thinking. We were estimating the other person's goals. We were thinking that this is where you've already in a discussion feel you understand what someone else wants.
Oh, you think for them.
You think for them. You fill in the blanks.
Right. So many times, even in our mediation, when we've observed mediation or co-mediated, one of the other parties with the other party in the other room will say something like, I know he's going to say this.
Right.
I know this is what she wants. And it's, there's a part of us that gently nudges them to say, are you sure? Would it be helpful to clarify that, to find that out? Because oftentimes
it's not that
goal. So we talked here about the TRIP acronym, the types of goals that people have when they're in conflict or any kind of disagreement. You guys know what it is, right? The number 1 is topic or content. Number 2 is relational. Number 3 is identity or face work. And number 4 is process. And these shift and alter and move about and change in the
So when you understand these things, you can understand what's really behind the conflict. Right. So again, it might start at one point, but our driving force and relationships is what we're all about. So we understand that usually that's what's driving most conflicts, is that your somehow your relationship is unsettled and in question, and you're worried about saving face in this whole process, and that caused so much of what the actual conflict is. If you can back up on these things, be vulnerable, look at it objectively, you can get beyond that conflict pretty cleanly.
And I love that idea of backing up and looking at it objectively. And if you want to respect your partner's goal to save face and protect the identity, you can do that and still respect that that's the place that they're in right now. It doesn't mean that they will be there forever, but that they are there right now. And so you wouldn't call them out on that, like, well, you're just being egotistical. You wouldn't say things like that. You would try and ask questions like, if you could have anything that you want right now, what would it be? And help them to clarify their goals, because chances are when they are trying to save face, they're coming across with vague goals, and that is going to muddy the waters.
Okay. Well, so we hope this has been an informative educational process. It's been that for us, I know, to learn about this TRIP acronym. And we hope you can put that to work in all of your relationships.
All right. Thank you for joining us here today on the Relationship Restaurant Podcast, where heart-healthy communication is at its best. If you would like a 30-minute free consultation on anything, especially maybe you're going through a tough time, maybe you're having a fight, maybe there's something going on with your mother-in-law, give us a holler at poppyandjeff.com. That's POPPYANDGEOFF.com. And submit an email, and we will get to you and share a 30-minute consultation that'll be absolutely free.
Until next time, we're Poppy and Jeff. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.